It's hard to describe the excitement I felt upon seeing Slitterhead's reveal trailer. It was weird, mysterious, but most importantly, exactly what I'd been craving from the game industry. The game being teased was by a new studio founded in 2020 by Keiichiro Toyama, the director of Silent Hill, Forbidden Siren and Gravity Rush. Slitterhead is Bokeh Studios' first original IP and embodies their desire to make new, exciting experiences. This new game differs from previous projects by being more action-focused while retaining the horror elements Toyama's projects are known for. I won't lie, I was a bit disappointed upon seeing the combat trailer, but decided to keep myself open to the game as it was clearly trying to do something different. The decision to take a more action-oriented direction was to make the game more accessible. As Toyama stated in an interview with IGN,
"Horror adventure games are kind of similar to extremely spicy food. People that are into it love it, but other people don't really bother to try it out. That's why we decided to keep the essence of horror games while making a game that feels good to play."
Luckily, many of the dev team previously worked on the Gravity Rush games, so they already knew how to develop fun action gameplay. This desire clearly comes across in the moment-to-moment gameplay, with it favouring high-intensity action rather than slow atmospheric horror. Toyama, as well as other members of the dev team, also brought their experience from the Siren games to Slitterhead, evolving the sightjacking mechanic in far more engaging ways. Where Siren mostly only allowed players to observe through an enemy's perspective, Slitterhead grants the ability to possess NPCs completely. This unique approach makes NPCs essentially disposable, something playtesters found difficult to wrap their head around. According to the game's producer Kazunobu Sato,
"When playing with the same mindset as in other games, you tend to try to defeat the enemy using the same character. That's why we make it clear during the tutorial that it's okay to sacrifice bodies. It's interesting to see players trying to protect the lives of the characters they control at first, and how they start to care less and less as they get used to the game."
The philosophical questions and moral instability this raises in players is a great way to preserve that sense of horror well after they've put down the controller. This aspect is also intentional, as Toyama wished for players to still feel the essence of horror within a narrative that evokes anxiety through its unfolding story. None of this is to say that Slitterhead isn't visually scary though, as Toyama wished to return to his horror roots. This is also hinted at by the title's initials, SH, referring to Silent Hill. As he stated in an interview with Rely on Horror,
"I'm more drawn to the psychological fear of the unknown, how you're afraid of it, and something just completely out of your imagination happens right in front of you. I want to convey this through my games, especially in the horror genre. I guess that kind of fear is more impactful than just being afraid of being hunted or being murdered."
The creature designs are the game's most obvious application of this philosophy. The Slitterheads are based on the Yagoji from Chinese folklore and monsters that appear in seinen manga series that eat humans. Due to budget and scope limitations, focus was put on creating several enemies based on a single strong design, instead of many varied designs. These different breeds, I guess you could call them, are each easily distinguishable from one another thanks to their solid designs, and they definitely leave an impression on you as you're occasionally shown full transformations of these monsters from the human bodies they disguise themselves with. The combat itself was inspired by seinen manga series where protagonists wield cool supernatural abilities and Hong Kong action films from the 80s and 90s. The modernness and beauty of Wong Kar-wai's films also contributed to the visual aesthetic of the game. These inspirations led to incredibly energetic combat and chase sequences that aim to fill you with the same excitement. This excitement is then heightened when facing off against the otherworldly monstrosities that are the Slitterheads. The game's setting, Kowloon City, is inspired by a combination of the now non-existent Kowloon Walled City and Toyama's nostalgia for Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s. Experience with Gravity Rush helped create more vertical gameplay, which allows players to experience the wonders of the bustling nighttime environment from many different viewpoints. The sounds that fill the city were mostly designed by renowned composer of the Silent Hill series, Akira Yamaoka, who was brought on board to create a soundscape that perfectly encapsulates the world we find ourselves in. With Slitterhead being a fairly unusual game, Yamaoka was able to let loose his creativity, filling the game with a unique collection of audio and music pieces. When asked about his approach to Slitterhead's music, he stated,
"Rather than perfect matches, we look for some sort of misalignment, which makes it feel more fresh and attractive."
Regarding the rest of Slitterhead's weird and wonderful aspects, I'll explore them as they are introduced throughout the game, as well as a more in-depth look near the end. I try my best, despite failing every time, not to go into extensive detail with story recaps, but I think this game, more so than any other I've covered, requires it because of how complex it gets later on. Speaking of, if you want to avoid spoilers, I recommend playing the game yourself and coming back to this video afterwards. Okay then, let's take a look at Slitterhead. The game opens with a view of a plane passing closely over the top of Kowloon City's skyline. As the credits come in, the main characters are introduced, showing a glimpse of their daily lives before all was disrupted by their inclusion in the story. We see a foreign detective arriving at a crime scene where a corpse was found stuffed into a bin with a strange gaping hole where its eye should be. After the title screen, the camera begins to flow aimlessly through the streets with unintelligible narration. It stops before a dog, seemingly barking at whatever presence we're inhabiting. You get a prompt to possess the dog, which is highlighted by a blue marker on its head, and with the click of a button, you enter the body of the confused animal. You gain control here and begin to move through the dirty, cluttered back streets. A group of men gossip about a series of murders happening that are possibly caused by something called Slitterheads. There's also an elderly lady that seems very out of place in her surroundings, but we continue on, following the scent of something familiar yet forgotten. When a path is blocked by a man who shoos us away, we can possess a woman to get past him. She feels a lot more sluggish to operate, the 2 legs more challenging to balance upon compared to 4. We possess another man to get past a fence and soon are approached by a promiscuous woman in the shadows, having spotted her next prey. She then transforms into a gruesome creature, her head morphing into an amassment of maggot-like tendrils. The monster attacks, aiming its beaked mouth at our head, and with no way to defend ourselves, we flee, combining the tactics of hobbling away with possessing new hosts in order to pass various barriers in our way. The spirit, the entity we're playing as, questions the monster it just encountered, having somehow lost all its memories before the start of the game. We then see a couple riding a motorbike. The man drops her home before continuing on with his night. She reminds him that they have a patient tomorrow morning, so we can assume they're both doctors. Continuing with the spirit, we possess our way through the side streets, collecting memory fragments along our way. These can be viewed between missions in the main menu and will gradually unveil more of the spirit's identity and backstory throughout the game, albeit in a very fragmented manner. After collecting the second memory, we are reminded of how to fight. In this imaginary realm, we are given a club which manifests from the host's own blood and are taught to block, deflect, and attack a single ribbon worm enemy, which, let's get it out of the way, looks like a penis. I mean, it's just a big penis monster, even less subtly designed than Shin Megami Tensei's Mara. Anyway, you're also taught the value of possessing other people during battle. Body hopping to another host just before an attack hits you can not only allow you to escape taking damage, but also let you get in an attack from behind. The more civilians that find themselves in the battle arena, the more options you have in battle. The people you possess are also bestowed special powers during battle. The main benefit is the blood weapon they can wield and the ability to heal by absorbing spilled blood on the ground, but more become available later on. When you feel you've honed your skills enough, you can exit this memory realm and continue on your way. We eventually encounter a woman being pursued by a suspicious man, but continue to collect the lost memories, deeming them more important than the safety of a stranger. From atop a roof, we spot another memory on the ground below, but instead of finding a safe way down, we, as the spirit, decide the best method is to jump down and switch bodies just before hitting the floor. That way we are saved from being hurt. We do this and it goes swimmingly, but for some reason all the people around us are freaking out about the woman who just plummeted from 10 stories above. Continuing on, we get a vision of the woman earlier being harassed by the man. We then follow her presence and find her cowering in the corner before another Slitterhead. This one looks different though. We do battle with the monster using our newfound abilities, but out of desperation it transforms into a huge creature with octopus-like features. It impales the fleeing woman with its tentacle before returning its attention to us. In this form, the monster does more damage, has a wider range of attacks, and has an increased health pool, which is indicated by the bar at the top of the screen. We can't do much damage to it, but after possessing the injured woman, we find ourselves with much higher combat capabilities. Her wounds are instantly healed, and instead of creating a club from her blood, she grows long claw-like nails from her fingertips. This is Julie, and she's what's known as a rarity in this game's world. Rarities are much tougher compared to regular civilians and have, in addition to unique blood weapons, special abilities that aid them in combat. Julie's abilities are Sonic Claws, which send out a wave of blood towards her target, possibly staggering them if they're mid-attack, a throwing knife attack called Blood Ripper, and Revive All, which not only heals Julie, but those around her, including civilians. As we defeat the Slitterhead in its true form, the motorbike man arrives to distract it with blasts from his shotgun. With its attention divided, Julie can finish it off with a decapitation. Upon its defeat, Julie has a vision of her city burning to the ground, and 3 powerful looking beings watching the destruction from above. As she's consumed by flames, she wakes up in her bed, safe and sound, but definitely unsettled. We then are introduced to the first of this game's interesting conversations between a rarity and the spirit. In each, they discuss recent events, while images of the characters sitting around in various environments and close-ups of their faces fade in and out on screen. I don't mind the way the game depicts these interactions, as they're fairly cerebral in nature to begin with. The issue I have, which is one that exists throughout many other aspects of the game, is the weird mumbles and sighs the characters do instead of talking. Rather than having the voice actors perform all the dialogue for the game beyond just the cutscenes, they recorded a variety of noises in different tones that can be used to accompany the text dialogue and will usually match whatever emotion is being conveyed. The unorthodox, borderline experimental presentation definitely takes getting used to though. During this chat, the spirit and Julie become properly acquainted and agree to work together to rid the world of Slitterheads. In addition to the relationship between the two characters developing, we also see a change in the spirit's personality. It seems mixing its mind with Julie's has made it a little more empathetic to the people being killed by the monsters, and its goal changes from just wanting to destroy the Slitterheads to wanting to stop them from hurting more people. Julie also names the spirit Night Owl, based on the legend of the Hyoki story, so that's what we'll call him from now on. After conversing with Night Owl, we select our next mission called Lurking Parasite. Our goal is to hunt down the Slitterhead that initially attacked us in the back alley. The mission begins with a cutscene taking place in a brothel that I'll have to blur for obvious reasons. The prostitute, when finished with her client, devours him much like a female praying mantis would. We then begin searching the streets for the location we were attacked. When a high fence blocks our path, we gain the ability to pull ourselves over it by extending a blood rope upwards. Using this method, we're able to traverse many of the higher levels of the streets throughout the game, and it's quite fun to do so, even if a little limited. In an attempt to learn more about our target, we try to question the other prostitutes on the street, but since they won't talk to Julie, we need to possess a man in order to persuade the information out of them. This investigation turns more reproductive than productive, so we try the back entrance of the building for further clues. While there, a shoe drops from somewhere above, which seems suspicious, so we ascend the building to investigate. In a dumpster, we find a man's body and track the presence of the Slitterhead that left him there. We can also sightjack the Slitterhead in order to help distinguish it from other civilians. Since they can disguise themselves almost instantly as a regular person and will hide in groups, you need to figure out exactly who they are based on their perspective. When you're sure who it is, you can splash them with blood to unmask them. This will begin a chase where they will knock people and objects into your path to try to slow you down. You can either pursue them as the rarity or repeatedly body hop between civilians to keep up. Eventually, the Slitterhead will give up on fleeing and will transform into their true form. This one has the appearance of an orchid mantis, which might explain its earlier behavior when mating. This fight goes much the same as the previous boss fight did, but I'll take this as a good opportunity to talk more about the combat. When fighting enemies in Slitterhead, you basically always have your guard up. This protects you from the majority of attacks, which will give you a brief chance to deflect or parry when prompted by a directional indicator on the screen. If you parry enough attacks without taking any yourself, you will enter a witch time-like sequence where everything else will slow down and you can get some extra attacks in. The parry system is displayed as the yellow circle in the bottom left. With each successful parry, it will fill up, and when you take damage, it will drain. It's a simple system, but it makes the combat a lot more fun and engaging. There are certain attacks that you can't block or parry though. These are indicated by a red shine from the Slitter's head, and the only way to avoid taking a massive amount of damage when this hits is to dodge it by rolling out of the way or by jumping over it. These attacks are less common than the regular parryable ones, but you always need to be ready for them since they can kill you almost instantly. Also, when locked in a battle against a Slitterhead boss, you can do extra damage to them by focusing on the human body that dangles from their back. By doing enough damage to this body, you can knock it free, and in certain instances you'll be rewarded with a clothing item. After defeating this Slitterhead, the man on the bike returns, and when he raises his gun towards Julie, Night Owl abandons her. Now, without any power, she flees down the side streets where the man can't follow. Later, Night Owl and Julie discuss their joint adventure, with Night Owl having returned to her at some point since. He explains he left because he thought she'd be better at explaining things, but clearly doesn't understand her that well. They also decide to next investigate the people behind the prostitution ring, so that's our next mission. Before tabbing over to the next day to select the Sleepless Zone mission, you can use the points you earned from completing the previous mission and finding Hyoki memories to upgrade the rarities' stats and abilities. Here you can strengthen their blood weapon, allowing you to do more damage and further your attack combos, upgrade their active skills, which strengthens their unique abilities, and upgrade passive skills, which are just general buffs to stuff like healing, defense, deflecting, and attack detection. The Sleepless Zone mission has us infiltrating the Golden Chilin by use of stealth and body hopping. The bouncer at the entrance won't let us in as we don't appear to be a customer of this particular establishment, so we possess a man through one of the back windows and proceed inside. Assuming I'd find it easier to investigate disguised as an employee, I possessed one of the bouncers, but NPCs still treated me as a customer. I feel like it's a fairly big oversight in a game that has you possess different people in order to complete specific tasks. One of the women I questioned about suspicious activity even commented on me not looking like a customer after I'd taken the form of the bouncer that was standing beside her for God knows how long. It's weird and slightly disappointing that there isn't more of an emphasis on who you possess. The prostitutes mention a troublesome colleague called Anita, so we ask more about her while searching for the manager. We find the manager, Michelle, on an upstairs terrace. She also treats us like a customer despite our appearance and blocks us from entry to the girls' waiting room where we might find Anita. We possess someone on the opposite balcony and make our way through the prostitute's apartment complex. While gathering information, a stylish woman with a bright red bob cut walks past. That's definitely Anita. An intensely ominous, droning throat-singing track pushes us through the tight halls, but we're stopped by another pupil form, Slitterhead, as we exit the complex. This is our first real fight as a civilian, and it's obviously a bit tougher than when possessing a rarity. This will happen often during the game, where you'll find yourself entering a battle in the shoes of a regular person. Thankfully, the rarities will arrive after a short time and you can switch to them, but the period where you're trying your best to hold out, especially against later bosses, can be surprisingly challenging. The civilians all have the same default ability, a war cry which can be vital in surviving some encounters. This lets you attract the enemies to you, which can be used to draw foes away from a downed rarity or even let you get a cheeky attack in while their backs are turned. Civilians also gain additional abilities based on the rarities chosen for the mission, which I'll talk more about later. Once the Slitterhead is dispatched, we can inspect it to get a vision of its recent memories. We see another Slitterhead in a position of power, ordering the one we just killed to take care of us. We continue the search, eventually arriving at a dining hall where we're attacked by a Slitterhead that senses our unusual presence. The other gang members are surprised by this monster's sudden appearance, so it appears the corruption is still well hidden. Further on, we arrive at the boss's headquarters, where he sticks 2 Slitterheads on us at once. I enjoy multiple enemy fights in this game because they offer a wider variety of tactics and challenge. For some reason though, you don't have the ability to quickly switch your focus between different enemies. This can be a big issue in later fights where you're up against a dozen enemies and want to focus on one target specifically, but can't because you keep targeting other enemies. Also, the lack of an icon to easily indicate your target can be an issue when you have to unlock your target to switch to a different enemy, but can't tell which one you're focused on because they're standing too close together. Anyway, when the 2 smaller ones are defeated, the boss will transform into its true Slitterhead form. Once he's dead, the mission is complete. During the intermission chats, Julie asks Night Owl what he is. You get the choice to answer either alien or ghost. I thought it was an odd interaction as we, Night Owl, don't know what we are at this point. The 2 then decide to look further into this Anita person. On the 3rd day, we begin the Missing Girl mission with the goal to finally track down Anita. The club she frequents is for members only, and since we have no invitation, we need to get creative. Around the corner is an empty lot guarded by a man who you can possess and scale the building behind. I wanted to stick with Julie as much as possible though, so I brought him away from the area, switched back to Julie and entered unobstructed. It made me feel kinda smart, but while writing this script I realised it wasn't nearly as complex as it originally seemed. You then operate cranes via crane operators and lower a beam to access the nightclub's roof. In here you need to sneak your way past several employees who you can't possess for some reason, possibly due to a lack of compatibility with Night Owl. It's a fairly basic stealth section, but what makes it a bit more fun is the ability to check around corners by briefly dispossessing. There's a lot of clutter in these environments, so the ability to check around corners somewhat eliminates the danger of running into an unseen employee. You soon find yourself in a situation where sneaking isn't an option, but by possessing a drunk customer you can walk unsuspected past the security guards. Up ahead we see Anita and Michelle talking. Apparently Anita has changed recently and people around her have been going missing, which is pretty suspicious. Outside we can follow traces of her presence, which twist and turn through a series of side streets. After possessing a civilian in order to pass an obstacle, we get a vision of someone attacking Anita. We find her bloodied and unconscious and need to fight the true form Slitterhead that attacked her, which is hard to do as a civilian. Since there are no other civilians in this small area, it's advisable that you retreat down the alleys to an area with some until Julie catches up. After defeating the boss, the mission is complete, but Anita wasn't saved. Julie and Night Owl lament the loss of Anita, but since nothing can be done about her death, they switch focus back to the Black Rider, who seems to also have befallen a fatal accident. The vision of the city ablaze comes to Julie again, but this time after waking it appears time has rewound to a couple of days prior. Night Owl can apparently send his consciousness back into the past, which also allows the rarities he's fused with to have their consciousness sent back. We haven't physically gone back in time, only our consciousnesses have travelled, effectively giving us a second chance at the previous missions to hopefully achieve more positive results. Julie also gets a mysterious phone call from someone speaking gibberish, but ignores it. A new mission has appeared on the first day called Black Payback, which will give us an opportunity to find the Black Rider before he has an accident. We arrive too late though and find the motorbike in a fiery heap. Inspecting it shows us a vision of a Slitterhead in a white suit attacking the rider who flees down a side street. We follow the trail of blood, engaging in some fights along the way, and come across a battlefield between armed military, a group of lesser monsters including pupil Slitterheads, ribbon worms and jewel beetles, and the Black Rider. He lost an arm when attacked and is cornered until we possess him. Alex, like Julie, is a rarity, so his arm regenerates upon possession. He also summons a blood sword as his melee weapon. His main ability is a blood shotgun blast which can take out multiple enemies at once. It can be charged for higher damage, and pairing it with his other ability, Bloodwell, which attracts enemies to a specific spot, can crowd control a lot more effectively than Julie can. Alex's third ability is a suicide bomb attack that is best utilized when controlling civilians. The only caveat being that you need to quickly get in place and switch to a different person before you explode to avoid taking damage. If you fail to do so, you'll be downed and will lose one of your revive counters. After defeating all the enemies in this area, including an octopus boss, you complete the mission and Alex takes a nonchalant puff of a cigarette. Through the chats we learn Alex is a doctor and that he's very determined to eradicate all the Slitterheads. Lisa, the assistant nurse we saw on the back of his bike at the start of the game and who may be a cheeky nod to Silent Hill's Nurse Lisa, also often chimes in on his conversations with Night Owl, although she obviously doesn't know about the entity Alex is communicating with. You also get to chat with Julie about the recent mission and she asks Night Owl what the smaller creatures are. The options are symbionts or they're young, but since there's little physical resemblance between these creatures and the Slitterheads, I felt they were most likely symbionts. With Alex saved, the Oppressive Force mission becomes available to us. This time, when selecting our rarity, we can add a second to the mission as a companion. Companion rarities offer more variety to combat, but not much outside that as they won't even follow you around the map. Civilians will have access to a third ability and you'll have a more high-powered option to switch to if needed. Rarity abilities can combo quite well with each other, but I'll talk more about that later once we've unlocked them all. The mission opens with the foreign detective seen at the start of the game commanding military personnel, and when we arrive, the streets are loud with panic and disorder. The military open fire on us as we approach, identifying us as one of their targets. While the task force is intimidating at first, they can be dispatched quite easily. A seahorse-looking Slitterhead being gunned down draws us to a nearby alley where we find another special forces team, this time including one with a shield. The best way to deal with the shielded enemies is hopping to someone behind them, which is pretty obvious. Further ahead is another unit which uses special guns that disable the hit rarities abilities. In the square up ahead, the military have created a blockade where you'll need to make use of all the information and skills you've gathered thus far to clear out. The mixture of regular, shielded and ability disabling enemies makes it a fun challenge. After defeating an enraged Slitterhead that the armed forces were trying to capture alive, we see a different team attempting to extract their target before being intercepted by a powerful man with long white hair. He defeats them all with awesome martial arts moves and frees the captured Slitterheads. Two people in white, panicking from all the violence around them, transform into seahorse Slitterheads while crying out for their lord Yin Yue. When one is defeated, the other will flee to the rooftops where they will transform into a frogfish boss. Once defeated, the mission is complete. Afterwards, Julie expresses her discomfort with both killing the human military that fought us and the Slitterheads that expressed human emotions before transforming. Night Owl shows evidence of his personality being influenced by Julie as he wonders if, instead of coldly eradicating all the Slitterheads, humans can coexist with them somehow. Julie also expands upon the story of Night Owl and its counterpart, Leopardhead, a tale of two spirits that possessed people in order to fight evil. However, if an evil person possessed this power, they would become demons themselves, a tale that exhibits some similarities to this story's events. There are two new missions for us to choose between, thanks to rumors that Lisa passes on to Alex. The Hidden Cave mission on day 2 takes us to a possible hideout of the religious order the Slitterheads in white belonged to. We see Yin Yue speaking with his bedridden master before a commotion pulls him away. In order to gain access to this location, we had to get captured by them, somehow, and now need to escape a jail cell. This is easily done in spirit form as we can possess other captives until we find a possessible guard. We then sneak our way back to Julie's cell to unlock it. I originally thought it was strange that we need to sneak around while possessing someone that has every right to casually stroll through these areas, but it's explained that the Slitterheads can sense the spirit when they see the body it's possessing, although it's not explained why they can't sense it when it's crouched right behind them. Julie doesn't follow us as leaving an empty cell would be too suspicious, so we continue with our mission as the guard. By possessing another guard, we can exit the prison to the main building, where we find people worshipping some unknown deity in a church. The symbol on the stained glass resembles the one behind the master's bed, so it's likely they're either worshipping him or what he represents. We can possess a follower here to progress further through the facility and eavesdrop discussions to learn more about the organization. We discovered that this facility not only houses Slitterheads but also humans, having them coexist within this small community. It makes you wonder if these creatures really are as evil as we once thought. Upstairs, we're discovered by a follower who we then have to defeat before they report us. We chase them back to the church and Yin Yue intervenes. The fight de-escalates into a discussion where we learn that Tommy, the Slitterhead we chased, feels he still has a human heart and desires to protect his human companion, Bokeh. A reveal that goes against everything we know of the Slitterheads so far. As Yin Yue asks us if we are a threat to his organization, two different looking Slitterheads break through the windows with the intent to feast upon the humans. Yin Yue chases one away, leaving us with the other. They transform into an octopus boss and instantly use a new ward ability that can have different effects based on its user. You can permanently cut off the Slitterhead's ability to use wards by removing the human husk dangling from its back. The ward's effects are shown in the bottom right, making it easier to decide on how to counteract it. This ward's ability reduces our blood weapon's durability, meaning our other abilities would probably be more effective than regular melee. Luckily, I could switch to Julie, who hadn't been caught in the ward's range. After defeating these intruders, we leave Yin Yue and the followers mourn the loss of their fellow members. One interesting piece of information to come out of this mission is that amongst the Slitterheads there seem to be different factions based on their appearance. We have the sea anemone / cephalopods, the maggot / insects, and the seahorse / fish. It's also become more apparent that you cannot possess Slitterheads, which may explain why some NPCs earlier in the game weren't an option. It seemed like a janky restriction before, but in hindsight I see that Slitterheads may be more numerous than originally assumed. Day 2's Ghost Family mission has us investigate rumours of a suspicious family living in the area. We begin by questioning people in a busy courtyard and are pointed towards a nearby clinic. The doctor there waves us off, claiming the rumours of a suspicious family are just that, but after hearing an eyewitness account of a monster being seen in the clinic, we return to confront him. In the hidden basement, we find the Doctor, who of course turns out to be a Slitterhead. However, he claims to not kill humans to feed, instead acquiring brains from a nearby crematorium. He also helps many humans with medical issues like any doctor would. This doesn't excuse his nature as a monster though, so we need to take him out. When we inspect his corpse, we see a vision of the suspicious family tearfully thanking him for his help, and thanks to a code written in the background, we can locate them. When we enter the apartment, the daughter escapes out the window, so we give chase. A boss fight eventually ensues, in which the monster cries out for its parents as we slash away its spiny limbs, and when it's defeated, the mission is complete. Speaking to Alex afterwards, he doesn't seem to show any remorse about killing this creature that took the form of a child. From his perspective, the girl is already dead. Her body is just being operated by a monster. It's also implied that the reason he's so relentless in his pursuit of their eradication is because a relative of his was killed by a Slitterhead. Julie, on the other hand, shows a lot more empathy towards the Slitterheads, or at least the passive ones who show human emotions. The only fact that can help to steady her nerve is that in killing these monsters, she is saving the ones they could possibly hurt. On the third day, we get a chance to redo the missing girl mission. This time, things are a little different, which is to be expected since we have altered the events that led to this moment. Following Anita's trace again, we find her before she's killed. By possessing her, we discover that she too is a rarity. Anita's blood weapon is a halberd, which I found more satisfying to use than the other blood weapons so far. Her abilities include Devil's Scent, which can lure more civilians into the battle arena, a complementary mind attack ability which can temporarily control civilians and have them join the fight too, and a throwable poison needle ability, which I didn't find to be that effective. This time, since we were able to fight back so well, the Slitterhead flees through the streets, scattering boxes and people in its wake. We follow it to a rooftop and defeat it there. With its death, the mission is complete and Anita is saved from her fatal fate. With Anita on the team, we have the option to choose her for missions, which is what I did for most of the game because she's so powerful. We can now return to the lurking Parasite mission on the first day. The difference this time is that we can track the presence of the prostitute Slitterhead before it can do any more harm. Since we've been through this process before, we can skip most of the goose chase. By sightjacking, we can locate our target atop a roof, but must chase it down in order to kill it. After defeating it in a boss fight, the mission is complete. A new mission has appeared on the third day, Insidious Sucker. With the goal of dealing with the large number of Slitterheads that have appeared downtown, we set off. However, I don't recall there being such a large outbreak on our first time through. We begin by tracking a couple of Slitterheads through the streets. They buy time by summoning a large amount of penises, but they're as flaccid in difficulty as they are in appearance. We also have to deal with armed personnel that roll in, which makes dealing with the second Slitterhead challenging as they're caught up in a big scuffle. The fight is tough enough. There's a lot going on between the octopus Slitterhead, the ribbon worms, and the military who will focus on you if there's no closer monster. After the battle, the white suit Slitterhead appears and goads us into chasing him. We fight a shady duo atop a roof who seem to know a lot more than they let on, with allusions to Alex's death in the now avoided past. After their defeat, White Suit will fight us as a boss, all the while taunting us as if from a higher position of morality. As he dies, he sees Alex's face due to his helmet being cut off and vows to remember it. A weird thing to say as you die, but then again, unlike other Slitterheads, this one emits sparkling purple particles that rise into the air after death. In order to progress with the story, we need to find a new rarity. This will happen several times throughout the game, and you'll need to revisit missions in order to find a specific character. In Lurking Parasite RE Second Loop, you'll encounter a barking dog. By possessing the dog and using it to track a scent, you can prevent a homeless man from being devoured by a Slitterhead. This is Edo, and he's a little different from the other rarities so far in that he doesn't really manifest a blood weapon, instead fortifying his fists in order to do more damage with the martial arts techniques he has. His skills include Deflect All, which allows you to deflect multiple attacks automatically, Angel Step, which enables you to not only avoid an attack but quickly get around to the back of the enemy, and Burning Edge, which trades blood weapon durability for greatly increased attack power. I never really noticed the blood weapon durability mechanic during my playthrough, so that's probably a good payoff. Sadly though, I didn't enjoy Edo's moveset as much as I did the other characters, so I only brought him along when I needed to. I'll talk more about this later though. Once Edo is saved from his fate, the rest of the mission can be played as normal, or you can quit out to the menu. It took me far too long to realise the latter option existed. While chatting to Edo, we learned that he once stayed at the cult's headquarters and suspected something ominous was going on behind a specific door. This gives us a new lead when we return. Anita also doesn't believe that her mentor of sorts, Michelle, could be a Slitterhead, but we'll check that out later in a revisit to the Sleepless Zone mission. For now though, I was pretty eager to see what was behind the mysterious door, so we return to the Hidden Cave mission. This time, instead of getting captured to find the location, we can sneak in the back entrance. This infiltration goes much the same as the last time until we find one of the previous intruders. After taking him out, we search his memories to find the location of the door and also something referred to as rations, which the Slitterheads here seem to feed upon instead of humans. The way to the door is shut, but we can find a way in by possessing a person inside from an upstairs balcony. The moment we reach the door, we're interrupted by Yin Yue, who reminds us it's a restricted area before noticing we're the spirit. He gets word of the attack on the facility and runs to the chapel, leaving us to deal with the other two intruders. When one is defeated, the other will transform, but it's a simple enough fight. Watching Yin Yue consoling his followers after protecting them from intruders, Night Owl realizes that each time we go back in time, the scale of events gets a little bigger. In Sleepless Zone RE Second Loop, we return to the Golden Chilin headquarters. This time, before we even arrive, the path forward has been paved with blood and death. Where we once questioned employees for Michelle's whereabouts, we now find ribbon worms feasting upon their corpses. After fighting our way through the carnage, we reach the head office and find Michelle waiting, poised as always. Deciding we're still no match for her, she leaves us to her underling we fought last time, but unlike last time, he'll flee to the city outside before we can finish him off. We give chase across the rooftops and balconies until we find him feasting upon more people, and upon his defeat we again complete this mission. Afterwards, both Night Owl and Anita agree that they need to be more careful when revisiting events because of how much the timeline is changing due to our actions. We again need to recruit a new rarity to progress the story, so we return to the Hidden Cave mission. This time around we happen upon a woman about to be devoured by a disloyal Slitterhead. This is Tree, and when we possess her we can fight our way out of the situation to save her. Tree's weapon is blood mitts because she's a housekeeper for the cult, and they function much like Edo's, making her another fisticuffs kind of fighter. Her abilities include Sentry Thorns, which sets down a pod that will attack enemies with projectiles independently, Blood Knuckles, which makes enemies bleed more from attacks, and finally Crimson Chains, which binds an enemy to restrict their movement. While using Crimson Chains, you can bind a foe, then switch to another rarity to get some easy attacks in. It's cool, but tough to pull off since combat can get pretty hectic. Once she's joined the team, you can quit out or continue with the rest of the mission. Chatting with Tree afterwards revealed that the food substitute the passive Slitterhead survive off is some sort of jelly substance, but more questions draw us back to the facility. On the third day, we can access a new mission called Jar of Poison, which takes us back there. We see Yin Yue speaking with his master again before being interrupted by Bokeh, the human companion of Tommy McSlitterhead we met earlier. We finally enter the forbidden door to find two Slitterheads discussing the need to find new ingredients since the recent attack. Sneaking past them, we gain access to a laboratory of some sort. Large, liquid-filled basins hooked up to pipes fill shelves throughout. Inspecting one of the basins, we see some fleshy mass lurking below the water's surface, but Tommy discovers us and attacks. In the scuffle, a basin is toppled and its contents spill out onto the floor. The pulsating lump of organs speaks to him, recognizing him. When Tommy sees the shamrock jewelry hanging from it, the charm he gave to Bokeh, he loses his mind. He attacks us and we're forced to kill this once passive being. As the life escapes from him through the wounds we inflicted, he limps towards Bokeh. When he disintegrates, his glasses fall beside her shamrock charm. We then investigate the lab to find more evidence of humans being processed into supposedly non-human food. Yin Yue arrives and is also shocked to discover the true nature of the rations. His mind begins to fracture and he retreats to his master for comfort. Following him, we pass through dingy back rooms full of refuse bags containing the discarded clothes of the people that were processed into rations. Approaching the master's room, we see Yin Yue reach him. He pleads for help, but the illusion has already begun to break. The master he worshipped is no more than a mummified corpse, its face skin strung up from the ceiling to keep the body upright. mockingly depicting the sun we see him represent. We continued to chase Yin Yue as his mental state deteriorates even further. As he flees, he uses his followers as shields, even transforming human followers into ribbon worms. The mission ends without us catching up, and in the intermission we're approached by Blake, the detective we saw at the start of the game. Apparently he's dreamt of the spirit since he was a child and now desires to help in our fight against the Slitterheads. Blake then becomes available as a new rarity, and I have to say I found this weirdly abrupt. With no proper introduction to the team through an instance of saving his life or something, he felt like an afterthought, and so I never really used him for the rest of the game. His abilities though include Bloody Shot, which manifests a machine gun that peppers enemies with bullets made from his blood. Bloody Gamble, which is a revolver that will do an increased amount of damage with each consecutive shot but can backfire at any point and do a lot of damage to you instead. And Bloody Mine, which randomly sets explosive mines within a cast area. A new rarity is needed to progress again, so we return to a door we couldn't open in the Sleepless Zone mission. This is also the door that was hinted at in the strange phone calls Julie has been receiving. Edo can pick the lock, and inside we find a teenage boy in need of saving. This is Donnie, who wields a blood lance which functions a bit like Anita's halberd in regular combat, but his first special ability, Fatal Lance, allows you to throw it at enemies with high piercing power. This, as we're soon taught, allows you to take out many enemies at once so long as they're all lined up. An ability that usually isn't as useful in one-on-one battles compared to large skirmishes. His second ability, Revenge Guard, will block and counter an enemy with more damage than they tried to inflict on you. And finally, Curse Resist will nullify any debilitating effects cast out by a foe's ward. Donnie's cool and a welcome addition to the team. With him saved, we can quit out and fill him in on the situation he's been dragged into. Anita has got some new leads on Michelle's location, which opens up a new mission for us. Tree also recalls some info that may help us track down Yin Yue. We'll start by continuing our pursuit of Michelle in the third day's Mantis Trap mission. It begins after we've already cornered her. While Michelle is sad that she wasn't able to bring Anita into her family, she has no issue with feasting upon her after she defeats her in combat, which seems contradictory at the very least. She then transforms into her Slitterhead form as seductively as a grotesque insect-like monster can, and the fight begins. Wait, she looks familiar. Oh, she's one of the Slitterheads we saw in the vision. It's good to know we're making progress in finding them, at least. The boss fight goes much the same as previous ones, although she tends to unleash a barrage of attacks in quick succession, which really tests your deflecting skills. She will also use a new attack that narrows the battlefield significantly, meaning you can no longer dodge to the side or flank her, so you can only back away or push towards her. She never did it to me, but I do wish she used some unblockable attacks in this situation, as it would seem a good strategy on her part. Upon defeat, her health bar will refill and a surprise second phase will begin. Now she teleports and uses a wide variety of projectile and laser attacks that seriously increase the difficulty of the fight. There's a lot more to consider now, and I absolutely loved every second of it. I understand that the 3 super Slitterheads had to have some special attacks and increased challenge, but I would have liked regular Slitterhead bosses to be less standardized in comparison. This fight made me realize how boring all the previous ones had been. Not to say that I didn't enjoy them, but I mean, look at this. I chose to defeat Michelle as Anita because it was most thematically potent, and when she dies, her human body reaches out regretfully before collapsing. Anita has never been very open with her feelings, and even though she tries to take solace in killing her mentor's murderer, it's clear that fighting something with Michelle's appearance has taken a toll on her. The beginning of the first day's Oppressive Force RE second loop mission sees us tracking down Yin Yue's presence across the city's rooftops. When we catch up, he of course doesn't recognize us, but after we reveal all the information we've learned so far, we bump up the timeline of his mental breakdown. The two sides of his personality fight for control as we chase him across the city, defeating Slitterheads he calls to action and ribbon worms his evil self creates from innocent bystanders. We then get a 5-minute timer until he escapes, which puts the pressure on you to deal with him and his minions quicker. Where before I was casually defeating each enemy because I find the combat enjoyable, now I was sprinting through the chaos past soldiers firing upon monsters feasting upon civilians just to end this as quickly as possible. After 2 minutes or so, Yin Yue will stop running and will offer you a chance to put him out of everyone's misery. Before we take him up on his offer though, he accidentally converts 2 followers into powerful Slitterhead bosses, which we must then do battle with. Yin Yue's evil side takes over and claims the title of Master for himself. This will probably not bode well for the preceding 2 days. This is a really fun fight and it's fairly tough, but I found my way through it by utilizing Anita's mind control ability to split the boss's aggro. With them defeated, the mission ends, Yin Yue escaping us once again. A chat between Alex and Lisa reveals that she's been having weird dreams with subtle ties to the Slitterhead he was chasing at the start. This opens up a new mission for us to investigate. We also get another choice when talking to Donnie. He asks what we do when facing an enemy we can't defeat, and considering our strategy for the game so far has been to gather more allies and retry events, I chose the flee and prepare option. Since Donnie's more tactical than some other rarities, he agrees with our logic. We return to the Insidious Sucker mission in its second loop to find the truth about Lisa's nightmares. After fighting through several groups of enemies, we find the white suit Slitterhead. He challenges us to defeat a Slitterhead swarm within a 5-minute time limit, which proved to be quite difficult for me, and I beat it with only 13 seconds to spare. We then start to receive multiple sidejack perspectives of Lisa being murdered, yet each corpse belongs to a random civilian. With these confusing illusions, White Suit taunts Alex, claiming he's saving Lisa as a valuable prize. Another frantic chase ensues and we fight the 2 shady people again. Upon their defeat, White Suit congratulates us on making it to the final stage. Lisa then shows up and Alex hurries her away before defeating White Suit. As the life fades from him, White Suit praises his master's flawless plan. A tendril then impales Alex. Its origin, the bulbous, monstrous head protruding from Lisa's body. Alex falls from the rooftop as the thing that once was Lisa watches with satisfaction. In an intermission chat with Alex, Night Owl theorizes that the Slitterhead that occupies Lisa is different from the rest and has the ability, like us, to go back in time. Alex urges Night Owl to return as far as he can to save Lisa, but the known limit is the start of the first day. In the new mission on the first day, Overlimit, we attempt to go back further in time than we have so far. We see the duo riding the motorbike like at the beginning of the game, but Lisa has already been claimed by the monster. We fight her, all the while Lisa-like cries call from the Slitterhead's body. When we defeat it, it evaporates in blue orbs like White Suit did before. A civilian then approaches, claiming to be Alex's deceased sister. After another chase, a boss fight ensues, and when we defeat it, the Slitterhead again evaporates into blue orbs. We track Lisa's presence, or the presence that inhabits Lisa's body, and find another new host. Its taunts targeting Alex and his family-related trauma push Alex closer to his breaking point. We then meet Lisa again and she reveals she's the same Slitterhead that killed and became his sister. After another desperate chase through the city, we fight her again. As the blue light rises from her dying body, she decries that they'll always be together. A usually romantic sentiment that has a completely different meaning here. Afterwards, Alex is in a pit of despair. The realization that this Slitterhead has the power to return to the past to not only be the one to kill his family but also Lisa, a power that not even Night Owl has. Regardless, Alex is determined to kill it as many times as it takes, even if it's an eternal endeavor. In a chat with Tree, Night Owl decides to return to the cult's facility since he basically ruined their chance for a peaceful existence. In Day 3's Jar of Poison RE second loop, we visit the cult again. Without Yin Yue, the followers are lost. We follow streaks of fresh blood to their master's lair, wherein we find evidence of a deadly scuffle that broke out between some disillusioned cultists after they discovered their leader's corpse. Everything's falling apart a lot quicker this time around. In the lab we find Yin Yue, watching on as a follower indulges in some rations. He leaves after telling us to find him where this all began, and after fighting several groups of his underlings we return upstairs. We find Tommy defending Bokeh from a maddened follower, and since he's unable to see us as an ally because we have no experience with him in this timeline, he attacks. When he's defeated, he transfers to Bokeh and flees outside. We fight again here and defeat it for good. The violence and destruction continues within the cult until nothing remains. We let these events play out, unable to stop them. Wait a second. Anita's eyes are blue, not red. That's new. Tree has proven a valuable source of information regarding Yin Yue and knows where we'll find him next, which gives us our next mission. The Drifting Veil mission on the third day begins with a fight against Yin Yue's true form, which is another of the 3 Slitterheads seen in the vision. The battle consumes much of the city, with him often summoning ribbon worms and relocating. It quickly becomes quite the clusterfuck, and I struggled with this fight more than any other in the game, I'd say. To complement the multitudes of smaller foes he calls to assist him, Yin Yue will perform a move that blinds you if you witness it. During the time you're blinded, you'll often be surrounded by the enemies you've been kiting around the area. It's incredibly challenging, and I found the civilian's Warcry ability to be an absolute lifesaver. The duration of the battle is dependent on Yin Yue's health bar, so depleting that is priority. However, the numerous enemies around him make it very difficult to get successful attacks in. The Warcry ability allows you to draw the smaller, faster enemies across the arena so you can get in some damage on the slower, lumbering Yin Yue who follows behind them. It's impressive how this game is able to make such a relatively weak resource so important and powerful under certain conditions. When Yin Yue reaches 50% health, he will flee the arena. When you catch up, the fight will continue, but he'll have entered a new phase where he'll use much the same attacks that Michelle did during her second phase. At about 30% health, he'll cast an illusion attack that plunges us into a series of dark, misty halls. We're inflicted with effects that limit our movement and abilities, which makes it all the more tense when Yin Yue suddenly appears before us. His size made all the more intimidating within this cramped environment. Luckily, this version of him is weak, so we can continue through this labyrinth without much trouble. Upon finding him whimpering at the foot of his master's bed, we return to the real world and continue the battle. When he's finally defeated, his human body falls to its knees in acceptance. When talking with Tree afterwards, she only has positive things to say of Yin Yue, even Night Owl admitting that he was a good man that was exploited by the Slitterhead. Once again, a new rarity is required to progress the story, so it's time to go find the final one. The mysterious lady is unique among even the rarities, as she can only be acquired after finding her within several different missions. After joining the team, Betty reveals that she encountered Night Owl, who she refers to as a fairy, when she was a young girl, implying that it was, at least at some point, possible for Night Owl to go back further in time than we thought. Betty's blood weapon is a cane, and her skills include Indomitable, which buffs you, improving defense and countering enemies if you attack at the same time, Diabolic, which functions much like Blake's mines except summoning blood spikes that instantly do damage to enemies, and finally Lunatic, which sends you into a literally uncontrollable rampage on nearby enemies with the addition of increased attack power. A chat with the increasingly aggressive and determined Alex grants us an opportunity to revisit the Ghost Family mission. Alex is a mandatory choice for this mission, and I feel like whoever you choose to accompany him will express some amount of discomfort regarding his goals. In my case, that sentiment came from Betty, which somewhat gave it an air of wisdom. We confront the Doctor again, this time directly instead of needing to ask around. Night Owl's influence is suppressed by Alex's overflowing rage and willpower. As this happens, Alex's eyes flash a cold blue like Anita's earlier. The Doctor flees the scene, but we chase and kill him while fending off other Slitterheads that come to his aid. With him out of the picture, we proceed to our next target. Alex swiftly slays the couple and chases the girl out of the apartment. We fight across the rooftops against many enemies who wish to protect her, but none are a match. Finally, she is cornered and is forced to fight, but again, she is no match. Night Owl seems particularly disturbed by recent events and questions why he even came here if all it would lead to is meaningless slaughter. His will, however, is being taken over by Alex's. With this change, Julie feels she can no longer bear to associate with Night Owl and so departs, cutting herself off from this psychic connection. With Julie's influence severed, Alex finds himself unchained and able to truly channel his hatred and resentment into his massacring of monsters. A new mission, Undying Scorn, appears on the third day, and it begins with Alex chasing Lisa with the intent to kill. We find her in a temple hall, and she again torments Alex with imitations of the person whose body she now inhabits. She claims Lisa loved Alex before all of this, and it's hard to tell if she's telling the truth with Lisa's memories, or if she's just lying because she's sadistic. Regardless, the battle against the final Slitterhead seen in the vision ensues. Lisa is a welcome tough fight and immediately skips the grounded phase the others started with. She likes to teleport around frequently and will unleash barrages of projectile attacks while you try to cross the distance to reach her. There are also plenty of ribbon worms to fill that space, which makes it all the more difficult. At about 30% health, she'll unleash an attack that will tick down to the affliction of a deadly curse, which will kill all the civilians in the area. This timer really spurs you to increase the aggression, but since she has so little health left, it shouldn't be too impossible to finish her off in this time. As the blue orbs escape from her dying body, the mission ends, but of course we haven't seen the last of this time-travelling tormentor. With Alex determined to repeat this futile process of slaying unkillable deities, we return to the Ghost family mission in a third loop. I kind of like how Alex is losing his shit and repeating events just to re-kill Slitterheads. He knows it's pointless but refuses to be satisfied no matter how many times he repeats these massacres. He abuses the time loop not in repeated attempts to save someone, but to vent his frustration and rage. Each time he revisits a mission, it gets more and more streamlined too, showing how his practice is paying off, like a speedrunner mastering a game. This time, when he attacks the family, Julie arrives to protect them. She and the girl flee the apartment and we immediately battle Julie, who is being referred to as Leopardhead, Night Owl's adversary in the folkloric tale told at the start of the game. Julie is offensively strong but defensively weak, so stun-locking her with a flurry of attacks will take her down. She escapes when another Slitterhead arrives to avenge the Doctor. We soon find ourselves in another double boss fight, which isn't super notable other than the fact that I really enjoyed the increased challenge these present. When we catch up to the daughter, we witness Julie killing her, except compared to Alex's methods, this is done mercifully to save her from her pursuer's tempestuous rage. Julie turns to face her once ally, and we get by far the best cutscene in the game. The two fight, using all their skills and techniques to try to outmaneuver the other. We also see the true potential of body hopping combat here, and it's actually pretty scary when used like this. We face off against Julie again, and this time she has a large group of civilians to assist her. The fact that she can also possess civilians and heal by soaking up blood pools makes her very formidable. Before she can be killed, Night Owl uses what's left of his influence over Alex to hold him in place so Julie can escape, and with her exit, the mission ends. What's most interesting about this encounter is that Julie's possessed by another Hyoki. Hers makes her eyes glow red, like usual, while ours makes our eyes glow blue. So maybe we are playing as the new Hyoki? But how could that be? During the intermission, Alex expresses his desire to destroy Julie once and for all, and maybe while he's at it, he should dispose of the rest of the rarities just to be sure. With this, just like Julie, all the rarities detach from us, leaving Alex alone to fight the Slitterheads. I won't lie, this kind of upset me. I mean, mostly because I no longer had access to my favourite character, Anita, but still. Watching them disappear one after another from my screen really emphasized how much Alex is isolating himself from the group and reality. We then discover the reason for their departure was not because they willingly severed their connection from Night Owl like Julie did, but because Alex had been killing them himself, unbeknownst to Night Owl, who has now been completely consumed by Alex and has lost his autonomy and occasionally his consciousness. I have to say, it felt refreshing to be playing as the bad guy in a game. I can't think of any other instances where you play as the one character who breaks away from the group to become an antagonist, so I found myself really excited going into the last mission of the game. The Duel is the final showdown between Alex and Julie. I find Julie to be the perfect foil to Alex. Where he feels nothing but disgust and contempt towards the Slitterheads, she seeks to understand them and eventually comes to fight for them, or at least some of them. In combat, the two characters are also opposites. Alex uses purely destructive methods, often catching innocent civilians in the crossfire of his inaccurate shotgun blasts, while Julie can heal those around her, including weak, mostly disposable civilians. The way the game comes down to a fight between these two characters instead of against some Slitterhead god or something is an interesting choice and one I'm ultimately fond of. Julie is eventually defeated and lies at Alex's feet with his blood scalpel embedded in her stomach. Afterwards, Night Owl is obviously distraught at being an accomplice to Julie's murder, and while Alex is insistent that he carried it out mercilessly, he clearly felt a small amount of hesitation in the act. Night Owl questions his current state of existence, likening his inability to do anything other than cause pain and destruction to that of a Slitterhead, the one thing he sought to destroy since the start. We then flip over to a mirror world where all the rarities are still alive and Night Owl escaped Alex's imprisoning will before it was too late. We're now playing from the perspective opposite Alex and his murderous rampage, which is cool. It seems Night Owl created a new timeline by returning to a moment before Alex murdered all the other characters, as they'd all be dead otherwise, but we still need to stop Alex before he can replicate the other timeline's result in this one. It's a second chance for those who want to save the world. The first attempt failed because the one who was meant to do good spiraled into a cycle of pointless, unproductive murder. From here we can select the first day's Black Payback REV mirror mission, Christ that's a mouthful, with the goal of stopping Alex for good. We begin by heading to the scene of Alex and Lisa's accident, but the events in this timeline aren't occurring like they were before due to the severe disruption we caused. However, we do spot Lisa, who seems interested in us, so we follow her and find ourselves fighting the suspicious duo once again. In this timeline, they fight in the open streets instead of atop the roofs, where they wouldn't be witnessed. Clearly things are a lot worse off in this timeline if the Slitterheads aren't worried about concealing their activities. We chase the remaining foe through the streets, avoiding the deploying military as we do so. Upon defeat of this Slitterhead, Alex plummets from high above and plunges his blade through Lisa's chest. He finishes her off quickly and leaves the scene without confronting us. Since Alex seems to be fixated on killing the Slitterhead girl so much, possibly due to it resembling his deceased sibling, we know where he will strike next. We return to the Ghost Family mission, this time playing from Julie's perspective. We intervene and chase Alex outside, this time fighting him in the streets until interrupted by a random Slitterhead. Alex leaves, his attention clearly set on more important prey. We continue to chase him, following a trail of calcified Slitterhead corpses he left in his wake and fighting others that show up. I felt like the appearance of multiple random Slitterheads was kind of weird, but I guess they're more numerous and bloodthirsty in this timeline. The fact that Alex ignores all these Slitterheads that we end up fighting in favour of continuing his pursuit of the young girl goes to show how far he has strayed from his original goal of destroying all the Slitterheads. He now focuses on the few that affect him most personally, the child that reminds him of his sister and the woman he may have had feelings for. We're too late to stop him from succeeding in his hunt, and before we fight him again, he explains his goal to contain the time-travelling Slitterheads within this 3-day timeline by killing them over and over again. It seems like a noble cause, sure, but it also seems like he's content with punishing himself for failing to save his loved ones and refuses to consider any alternative solutions. Solutions that we, unclouded by fury, are open to exploring. I feel like mentioning here that while it is refreshing to fight fellow rarities instead of Slitterheads and ribbon worms, I don't enjoy the fights themselves. Fighting against Alex, who is now the one referred to as Leopardhead, he will repeatedly spam the same attacks that cannot be deflected. His shotgun blast is also a menace, as the only reliable way of avoiding it is to be out of its reach. Where in fights against Slitterheads you can employ some measure of strategy, I found myself aggressively body hopping to do enough damage to counteract the amount he can heal and inflict on me. Which I guess is technically still a strategy, but it really doesn't feel like it. I really wish the rarity versus rarity fights were better, because there's way more potential for fun combat with them than the Slitterheads. When Alex is finally defeated, he will flee before we can finish him off. During the intermission, Night Owl regains his memories and his reason for coming here. We can then revisit a conversation we had earlier in the game, where Julie asks if Night Owl is an alien or a ghost. Now we have the option to reveal we're a time traveller. Apparently, in the far future, a catastrophe occurred which wiped out all but a few humans. As a last resort, they sent their minds back in time to prevent the catastrophe, but they failed and could only inhabit the minds of lesser creatures. Through their desire to acquire higher functioning brains, they repeated the cycle of predation and transformation, evolving them into the Slitterheads we see them as today. They forgot their original purpose of saving the world and were left only with the instinctual craving for human brains. Night Owl is the last human who came in pursuit of them, but he too failed and all his memories were lost. He also speaks of a secret weapon he created, and when we return to a chat with Donnie, we can select a new dialogue option to reveal a method of magically sealing away an enemy you can't defeat. In the third day's new mission, Bindbreak, we set out to locate this magic seal that Night Owl hid away. It begins with us confronting a man standing amongst a pile of people he's violently converted into corpses. The magic seal's key was absorbed by him, so we need to relieve him of it, violently. At 75% health, he'll flee through the alleyways, and each time you catch up to him, you'll find more bodies left in his wake. With his defeat and the key claimed, the mission is complete. Night Owl describes his plan to restructure the other world's timeline with the hopes that it will essentially fix this one. We then gain the ability to travel between the two worlds. The world where the character's eyes glow red and the intermission screen uses red to highlight selected options is the Alpha world. The world where these things are replaced by the color blue is the Omega world. Returning to the Undying Scorn mission in the Omega world, we fight Lisa again, this time with the goal to seal her away and break Alex out of his cycle. It's a much tougher battle this time around, but the only main difference is her greatly increased health pool. This makes it more a battle of attrition, and maintaining the condition of the civilians becomes much more important and difficult. As Alex is about to plunge his sword into Lisa's chest again, Night Owl regains control and stops him. We then seal Lisa away for good in the interstice between worlds. With her gone, Alex feels lost. The sole purpose he was wholly dedicated to taken away from him in an instant. Flipping over to the Alpha world, we find Anita gravely injured. Regardless of our successful attempt to save everyone from dying at Alex's hands, just like we saved them from the Slitterheads, causality dictates that the result must be the same. And so, we lose each of the rarities once again. The world is trying to heal itself after Night Owl disrupted it, and since our involvement changed the other characters' outcomes, that had to be undone. Of course, it soon revealed they died by Alex's hands, with causality acting through him. We proceed to the last Duel mission on the third day in the Omega world. With the timeline essentially saved with Lisa's imprisonment, we could technically carry on without any more bloodshed, but that option seems unreachable from where Julie and Alex stand. The two face off in a final battle of violence and ideals. Again, this rarity versus rarity fight is tough, but made easier by the quick body hopping between the dozen or so unlucky civilians trapped in the arena with us. When Alex is defeated, his spirit abandons its host, leaving him to bleed out on the ground. He laughs while it happens though, seemingly accepting his fate and the futility of his efforts. Julie looks out at the rising sun beyond the waking city and sees an airplane banking towards her, and as the plane descends, the game fades to black. As the credits washed over me, I was left feeling underwhelmed. All our actions seemed pointless. We couldn't save the other characters from their untimely demise, and we also couldn't save the city from its destruction via plane crash, apparently. Our goal to stop the localized apocalypse was, unbeknownst to us, always unachievable. After the credits, Night Owl finds himself floating through the streets as he did when he first arrived in this era, and quickly reconnects with Julie and the others. With his knowledge of the future, he decides to sever his ties with the other rarities and hide them before Alex goes to kill them. We return to how things were at the beginning of the game, just Night Owl and Julie. Okay, it's time to retry this last duel. The two opposite forces fight again. Julie determined to free Alex from his cycle and progress time and its events, even if it means the two of them no longer existing within them, and Alex, who remains determined to repeat his endless slaughter. Julie prevails and the events repeat, but this time, after the spirit abandons Alex, Night Owl follows it onto the plane to stop it from overtaking the pilot. A fight breaks out on board, but the plane continues to plummet towards the city. Credits again fill the screen. Surely this can't be it. We were so close to succeeding, to changing the outcome, to defying causality. And then we see the plane rise above Julie, just missing a collision with the building she stands upon. The city is saved, but Alex is now missing. More credits. God damn this game. When these credits end, we see Alex return to his bike and ride off into the darkness. Text appears on screen that possibly hints at a future installment in the franchise, and then the game actually ends. Like, for real this time? Okay, cool. The game does revert back to before the final battle to allow you to complete anything left unfinished, which I appreciate, but in terms of story, it's done. And that was Slitterhead. Compared to basically every other game and film I've covered on this channel, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. For instance, the amount of notes I took while playing this game is over double the amount taken while playing Fatal Frame 3. It not only had me thinking about mechanical aspects of the game and narrative, but also thematic stuff, which really doesn't come naturally to me. Therefore, I'll start by giving my thoughts on the game's mechanics and working my way up to the heavier stuff. Slitterhead adopts a mostly realistic graphical style for its world. The environments are heavily detailed and succeed in creating believable spaces. Whether it's the colourful open markets populated by busy customers, the darker, colder side streets lined with clutter and solemn figures, or the interior areas scuffed with years of use. Every single place you visit is wonderfully designed, to the point where I'm tempted to return to the game when I'm finished this video just to more thoroughly explore all its nooks and crannies. I did have to lower my graphics settings a couple of hours in though, because as the number of enemies and fights increased, my frame rate did the opposite. I'm not that upset over it though, as graphical fidelity isn't high on my list of priorities in games. I did experience 2 hard crashes however, but I have no idea what caused that. Even OBS crashed and corrupted 90 minutes of footage, so I don't think I can blame the game entirely. The one thing that stands out in this game's visuals are its character models, which for some reason are less realistically rendered than the spaces they inhabit. Characters look a bit more caricatured, I guess. It's definitely more noticeable in women, and even then it's hard to describe. All I can say is there's a certain off quality to the models, making them appear almost doll-like, or like an anime character converted to 3D. I wouldn't say it's a point against the game, but it certainly took a couple of hours to get used to. The NPC models are a different story though. Instead of being unrealistically beautiful, they look as if made from carved potatoes. A lot of people take issue with these character models, saying they look PS2 quality, and I'm mostly of the same opinion. I think it's somewhat intentional though, as it makes the rarities stand out more, and if the civilians were hot it would contradict their purpose of being disposable. Oh dear god, what a horrible sentence. One issue I kept having was with the game's UI. I found the intermission screen difficult to navigate due to the amount of visual clutter, some of which I feel could have been removed or condensed to no detriment. It's probably just a me thing though, as I struggle to process large amounts of information when placed before me. There's just a lot of lines and boxes and circles and text and symbols, and it's scary, alright? Anyway, back to more valid critiques. Slitterhead's music is just as good at creating varied opinions as most other aspects of the game. It's unfortunate that I really hated the menu music because that's really the only track of the game I disliked, yet it's basically the only one I can remember since I heard it so often. Akira Yamaoka of Silent Hill fame lived up to his reputation by delivering an incredibly solid and thematically resonant soundtrack for the game. Each track feels at home with the environment it's used in, while also including elements that disjoint the sound from normality. Some are soft melodic tracks like the one playing in the opening cinematic, and others are more reminiscent of his iconic industrial style, but still fit with the bustling city and underground. My favourite of all the pieces of music is Dawn's Slumber, which plays while chasing down Anita for the first time. When this throat-singing track comes in, it instantly fills you with the determination to hunt down this shady character, each bassy drone injecting more power into your veins. It's amazing. The energetic rock track, Master of Labyrinth, that accompanies Julie and Alex's confrontation also perfectly encapsulates the frantic battle that's taking place on screen. I seriously recommend listening to the entire soundtrack, which is available on YouTube thanks to Akira Yamaoka himself. The moment-to-moment gameplay in Slitterhead, excluding the combat, is extremely linear. From the beginning of a mission right until the end, you're railroaded through scripted encounters and simple puzzles, to the point where it becomes very handholdy. The interior environments, while beautifully rendered with believable detail, are unbelievably restrictive. I only recall one instance where I was able to complete an objective that felt like the game wasn't guiding my hand the entire time, and even then it turned out to be unnecessary and slower than the intended method of progressing. There's no freedom of approach in situations, which is crazy considering the sheer potential the body hopping ability creates. The exploration, if you could even call it that, also isn't very engaging as you're stopped by cutscenes or interactions constantly. This is an aspect of the game where the smaller development scale becomes more apparent, and I understand the reasoning behind it, it's just a bit unfortunate. With how wonderful the game's world is to look at, it's a genuine shame you don't get more freedom to explore it. Hopefully, if Slitterhead ever receives a sequel, this will be one area they could increase the scope of. The puzzles are easily one of Slitterhead's weakest aspects. Like with general exploration, you essentially have no freedom. Everything is set up perfectly for you to solve the problem almost as soon as you encounter it, and that's if the game hasn't already told you what to do. I mean, for fuck's sake, the civilians are already crouched around the corners waiting for you to possess them to get past the guard. Why are they crouched here? Why? And there's always someone ready and waiting to be possessed exactly where you need them. An easy fix to make this less brainless would be the need to attract people to a certain area in order to reach them. Or even something as simple as needing to open or break a window in order to possess someone on the other side. But no, there's always a person or an open window exactly where it needs to be so that you don't have to spend more than 2 seconds thinking about your approach. I get that this isn't a full AAA production, but I feel like I'm not asking for a lot, right? In general, I feel like the sight jacking and free moving possession mechanics were underutilized. The most engaging way the sightjack was used is in tracking down Slitterheads who have disguised themselves as other civilians, but even that's made easier by the presence sense mechanic. These two mechanics conflict with each other, lessening the value of the other with their existence. How engaging it could have been to try to work out where the disguised monster is solely on environmental clues. There were brief moments where I found myself searching for a landmark that I'd seen through the Slitterhead's eyes, but these moments were few and far between. It also could have been used better in stealth sections, even though there aren't many. Instead of sightjacking enemies to check if the coast is clear or something, we used the free-moving possession ability, which is fine but isn't nearly as interesting as sightjacking would have been. It's weird because I've seen how well this can be done in the creators' Forbidden Siren games, and even games inspired by them, like Atama. It's ironic that in a game that's all about breaking out of the linear path of time, the gameplay is so restrictive. Regarding the chase sequences that often bookend the sightjacking moments, I found them disappointing. They soon become repetitive both mechanically and in the environments you traverse. Too many times did I chase a Slitterhead across a specific rooftop that I started to wonder if I'd accidentally replayed a mission I didn't intend to. I wish the hunts were more challenging. The only time it's even remotely difficult is when the target is walking along a densely populated street. The times when you find them atop a roof are comparatively pathetically simple. You also don't have the ability to throw blood at a civilian by mistake, which makes it all the more easy. If it were harder to discern the hidden Slitterhead and you could guess wrong, and in doing so both hurt a civilian and open yourself up to an attack, that could be a lot more engaging. Guessing wrong could also maybe straight up kill a civilian, which could add to the casualty counter you get upon beating the game. The challenge is also basically erased by the fact that Slitterheads will stop and wait for you to catch up, completely destroying any sense of urgency the game otherwise tries to create. It's weird, and all these aspects of the game really need work. Slitterhead's horror elements definitely don't live up to my expectations based on that reveal trailer. Aspects of that are very reminiscent of the Forbidden Siren games in particular, and with Siren Blood Curse being one of the scariest games I've played, I was looking forward to this new release. I was disappointed then to find that Slitterhead favours action over horror, or at least a horror atmosphere. Rather than spelunking deep and dense urban environments with the threat of monsters around every corner like in Silent Hill or Fatal Frame, Slitterhead uses horror as icing atop a cake of blood-pumping acrobatic action. There are few moments outside of combat that I would call tense and atmospheric, and thinking back on my time with the game, I primarily recall moments of combat or chases. The horror that accompanies these action-oriented experiences consists mostly of gory displays of body horror, although I would have loved more scenes of the Slitterheads slowly transforming from human to their true form. What we get most of the time is a quick transformation where the true form erupts out of the human host. I feel like the game lacks in visual and atmospheric horror, and I would like to say it makes up for it in psychological horror, but the focus on action makes that impossible. The narrative tension is closer to that of a thriller than a horror, like Back to the Future with added gore. I find the combat quite enjoyable though, even if there is not a lot of variety to it. I played the entire game using mouse and keyboard instead of controller, so I can only speak to my experience with one control scheme. I did enjoy how the game made use of the mouse though, having you whip the cursor towards oncoming attacks, often in quick succession, sort of simulating swinging your weapon towards a foes to parry it. It can be quite challenging, but that makes it more rewarding when you get in a good flow. I think the combat is much like Sekiro's. You have a lock-on mechanic that engages you with a single enemy. You spend most of the fight blocking, and the objective is to deflect as many attacks as possible to fill a meter which allows you to do extra damage. I find it interesting then that I enjoy Slitterhead's combat when Sekiro's was the reason I dropped that game. I think it's because you're less reliant on deflecting in Slitterhead since you already do enough damage without needing to stun the enemy, so it's more of a way to empower and master combat. That said, I always preferred to try to achieve the slowdown moment by parrying enough attacks. I think that style of combat is more satisfying than pure aggression, as you can get in a good flow with deflecting and attacking, where aggro isn't facilitated as much because the rarities aren't overly mobile and acrobatic. I have conflicted feelings regarding the game's enemy variety. I think the bosses have good visual variety, but the lesser enemies grow tiresome to encounter. The Slitterheads' appearances resemble gruesome distortions of existing animals. This is due to them only being able to possess the bodies of lower life forms when they originally travelled back in time. It's also a cool detail that all the animals that they adopt the features of are ones that use camouflage to some capacity. This fits with the Slitterhead tactic of blending in with their social environment perfectly. The Slitterheads are split into 3 different factions: fish, insects, and cephalopods. The true forms of Slitterheads of each faction can be subdivided further, with fish including frogfish, scorpionfish, stinkfish, and stonefish, insects including mantid flies, mantises, and leaf insects, and finally cephalopods including blue-ringed octopi, zebra octopi, flying squid, and maybe more that don't get named health bars. With only their heads transformed, the factions can still be distinguished. The fish have seahorse heads, the insects have larval heads, and cephalopods have... You know what? I have no idea. I actually tried to contact Bokeh Studios directly for an answer but got no reply. It looks like a succulent plant or a sea anemone or a collection of eggs, maybe? If anyone has any clue, please leave a comment, please. Anyway, it's disappointing then that with such variety in appearance, all the Slitterheads act the same as one another. This mostly applies to combat, but I was hoping to see some differences in how they attack, defend, or even maneuver during battle. Yet they all act the same despite the potential unique to their nature. Going over my footage, I really can't discern any specific behaviors or attacks for each faction. Maybe there is, but from what I can tell, the only new moves are introduced not because the Slitterhead is of a different faction, but because of the progression of challenge. I was hoping to see more of a rivalry between the 3 groups like we get a hint at during the invasion of the cult's headquarters. Here we see the cephalopods attacking the fish, but I'm not sure if we ever find out why. I guess if there were a rivalry between 2 of the factions, it'd be the ocean-dwelling ones. We do see the mantis prostitute devour her client after mating like female mantises are known to do, but because we don't see how any other factions act in a similar situation, I can't definitively say that this behavior is attributed to its species. I would like to though, since it's fun. I would have at least liked to have seen more species-related mannerisms shown by the Slitterheads, but I guess the focus was more on the human characters. The goal wasn't to explore the Slitterheads' culture, and keeping aspects of them mysterious, whether intentionally or not, helps to establish them as a strange invading threat. I like how healing works. I think more so than the Dark Souls games, it functions as a risk versus reward mechanic. In Dark Souls, if you find the time to heal during battle, you will regain a certain amount of health, we'll say 60%. In Slitterhead, you only regain health so long as you remain absorbing blood, so finding time to heal is much more difficult. The longer you spend thinking about whether to heal or not, the less healing potential you have. It's also the case that you can't heal anywhere you want because you need to be within absorbing range of a blood pool. It's not often that you'll have no way to heal, as blood pools form whenever damage is done to you, enemies, or civilians, but on a couple of occasions I found myself needing to smack a civilian in order to soak up their blood because I was too low on health to risk attacking the boss. You can also have your arms severed during combat and would be given a very brief window to retrieve it in the air via a quicktime event. I rarely succeeded at this other than by complete accident, as I'm not very good at navigating a keyboard without looking at it, but I do think it's a neat little mechanic. Without the arm you can't attack and will need to either find it on the ground and reattach it or sacrifice some of your health to grow a new one. It doesn't come up often, but when you do get a limb severed, the shock can destroy your flow of combat and things go wrong fast. In combat, civilians exist to be used. As much as the blade that forms in your hands, they are a tool to be utilized in your fight against the Slitterheads. As previously mentioned, the blood that spills from them can be used to heal you, but they do have a lot of utility in combat. You can body hop to them as a last resort or to take the attention off the rarity. They also gain various abilities based on the rarities chosen for the mission, the effectiveness of which depends on the player's tastes. I found the suicide bomb to be particularly fun, even if I rarely succeeded in activating it before the civilian was taken out by an enemy attack. The ability to draw the enemy's attention with the battle cry is also very useful and really can get you out of some tough spots later in the game. In an interview with VGC, Toyama explained,
"For this game, we had a discussion about how to balance out what ordinary civilians could do. Originally, they were supposed to be powerful, but that proved to be not entertaining.
This is understandable, as it would be difficult to balance the game around having all possessable NPCs being powerful while also retaining the special quality of the rarities. They're supposed to be disposable, so they had to be weak enough to entice players to seek better options at the earliest opportunity. I don't like how civilians will just materialize in an arena at the start of a fight if there weren't any in the area already. This also applies to how they appear when Anita uses her Devil Scent ability. In the case of the former, it'd be less immersion breaking for there to just be enough civilians around the predetermined fighting arenas so that none need to be spawned in, and when Anita summons them, I wish they kind of ran or climbed into the arena instead. It's explained that they're subconsciously drawn to the area of battle, but it doesn't justify their ability to teleport. At some point, Night Owl states that humanity's strength is its potency, seeing them as no more than an abundance of ammunition to whittle away the foe's defenses. It's a disturbing sentiment, especially considering the civilians don't consent to their use in this war, nor do they retain the mental function that the rarities do under Night Owl's influence. They don't benefit from being possessed as much as the rarities because, sure, while they might have the power to fight back now, they're put more in harm's way to do so. Also taking into account that their autonomy is stripped from them when they are dispossessed and regain consciousness, if they're even that lucky, they may have to deal with the fact that they killed a person. Imagine going out for groceries and the next thing you know you're standing amidst a pile of mangled corpses in some alleyway. That'd fuck anyone up. The casualty counter is a nice counterbalance to the theme of human disposability. When you beat the game, you're shown a counter of all the innocent people the game has secretly tracked that died during your playthrough. In order to unlock the true ending, you need to reduce the number below a certain threshold. I unknowingly managed to do this during my playthrough, so I thought the counter's purpose was to increase the deaths, as there was no indication that the final cutscene was shown because I'd met this target. Luckily, I found out its true purpose while researching before I went on a killing spree. It's a good incentive though, to return to these missions and try to not play so recklessly, to value the lives around you and not use people as tools. You may find you need to adapt a different playstyle this time around, one less destructive and more protective. It's a cool endgame difficulty spike of sorts, and I'd imagine it's even tougher to achieve on higher difficulties. I originally wished the companions played more of a role in combat. I felt it was unfortunate that they're prevented from doing so because of the fact that they need to be possessed by Night Owl to access their powers. I thought it'd be amazing if you could command them to do certain actions while you do your own thing, but I realized that them being almost completely useless while not being controlled is something unique to Slitterhead. It sets it apart from MMOs and Dark Souls' co-op where multiple characters can gang up on a single boss. It's more focused on you versus the enemy, and that's a positive in my book as I'm not really into auto-combat RTS type gameplay. There's also the benefit of gaining an extra ability when bringing a companion rarity along with you, and this can lead to some interesting dynamics and combinations. The fourth ability is decided on who the primary rarity is, I believe. I know you still have access to the ability through possessing the rarity, but having theirs as an extra option in the companion rarity saves you the trouble of having to switch to them to activate it. For instance, you can now blow yourself up as Julie using Alex's time bomb ability. I wouldn't say it makes for that different a combat experience, but it does open up more possibilities, which is always a plus. Boss fights are the encounters I found the most enjoyable in the game, as they had a much wider variety of moves than they could use against you. Each Slitterhead in its true form has the body of its host dangling from its back. This acts as a weak point, and attacking it will not only do more damage but may stun the boss if enough damage is inflicted. After receiving enough damage, the human body will be severed, which also stuns the Slitterhead for a short period. This is also how you get many of the unlockable costumes in the game, similar to how you acquire some weapons in Dark Souls by cutting off the boss's tail. It's not 100% clear which Slitterheads will grant you costumes by cutting off their human body, so I found myself targeting it almost all the time just in case. It also helps that hitting the frail body does more damage than the armoured limbs, and you're safe from most attacks behind the enemy. For these reasons, it's wise to attack the backs of bosses as much as possible, but it's not like they'll just let you. A tactic I enjoyed using against single true form Slitterheads was to position them between my two rarities and take turns attacking it from behind before it turned. I like the necessity to specifically sever the body from some bosses in order to acquire a new costume. It doesn't really make sense why you'd acquire new clothes from a naked, shriveled up sack of flesh, but it does introduce a bit of challenge to acquiring them, rather than just finding them around the environment or buying them from merchants. Although I do wish there was a bit of that too to give more value to exploration, but it is what it is, I guess. Most bosses have 3 fighting stances they can take during fights, and they'll usually switch between them while performing an attack. They have a default stance where they stand on their back four legs with their two front legs before them like a boxer, a more stable stance where they lean forward, get lower to the ground and bring their hind legs above them, and then a more agile stance where they stand tall on their hind legs and bring their middle legs behind them like wings. While there probably is a difference in the attacks they use in each stance, it ultimately doesn't matter as you only need to pay attention to the parry sensors. It is cool to see them basically transform mid-fight, but I wish there was more noticeable differences in their behaviours in each one, especially if it meant you suddenly had to approach the fight differently to counteract their strategy. Eventually, the one-on-one boss fights will begin to develop in difficulty, bringing in multiple smaller slitterheads, ribbon worms, and even a second true form slitterhead to increase difficulty and strategic complexity. They also may have abilities like covering themselves in debris to increase their defense capabilities, but I only saw that in one fight near the end of the game. I enjoyed these the most as the increased number of things to worry about brought me out of whatever comfortable rhythm I'd settled into and got me thinking about more ways to either use my rarities abilities or how to even use the swarms of enemies to my advantage. One tactic I found useful in the fight against Yin Yue was to fill up my deflect meter on the smaller enemies and then attack him as soon as I entered the slow motion window. Managing your positioning and prioritizing targets is very important in large scale fights too. There will often be one or two pupil slitterheads mixed amongst the swarm of ribbon worms which will use projectile attacks to inflict status effects. While the lesser enemies are easy to deal with on their own, when you're being slowed down by a pesky slitterhead they can quickly overwhelm you. A genuine issue that arises in multi-enemy fights that certainly doesn't boil down to skill issue is that the camera lock-on becomes incredibly difficult to use. You don't have a visual indicator of which enemy you're locked onto other than the camera facing them, and more than a few times I tried to lock onto the boss and attack only to discover I'd locked onto a ribbon worm beside or in front of them and aimed my attack at that instead. I think the game needs a way to quickly and easily switch lock-on targets other than unfocusing and refocusing with the hope of targeting the right enemy. And finally, I'd like to talk about the Shrine Guardians. These are optional boss fights accessible via small shrines scattered throughout various missions. Each boss is based on one of the 12 zodiac animals, although from what I can tell their names mostly aren't relevant to their appearance or playstyle. The shrine bosses are a mixed bag. Some, such as Rooster, Ox, and especially Rabbit, can be much tougher than the other bosses, except the big three of course. Others then, such as Rat, Horse, and Dog, don't provide much of a challenge beyond what you've already experienced plenty of times throughout the game. There are a few cool gimmicks they employ though. Monkey has you fight against waves of spawning enemies within a very narrow alleyway, having you micromanage damage output and group density so you don't get overwhelmed. Rooster puts you in a similarly narrow arena against 3 poison slitterheads who do a lot of damage both through attacks and heavy poison. You fight Ox in an incredibly small room, forcing you to get more aggressive as there's basically no time to take a step back and assess the situation. I had the most trouble fighting Rabbit, whose ability to heal extremely quickly made it a very difficult fight. Honestly, this fight is up there with the big three. I had that much trouble with it. The shrines are a fun addition to the game as they provide another method of acquiring costume items upon defeat, but I do think their potential was wasted. Maybe half of them provided a decent challenge, with only half of those being as difficult as an optional boss should be. So only 3 of the 12 shrine bosses actually made good on the disquieting presence that they supposedly emit. That's a little disappointing, no? I think to make the most of the shrines you need to attempt them as early as you can, because you may be robbed of a lot of the challenge if you wait until the endgame and have already encountered and defeated groups of 1 or 2 slitterheads with a few backup ribbon worms. Maybe except for Rabbit though. I don't see anyone doing enough damage to defeat that thing until late in the game. The blood weapons are a cool concept, and I like how they were intended to give each rarity something unique to them and representative of their character to fight with, although I don't think the execution was as good for some characters as it was for others. The civilians are all given a blood mace to wield, which very fittingly feels as clunky to use as they do. The rarities then feel more liberated in combat, almost as if they've been training with their weapons for quite some time. Now, while I do think the blood weapons generally did capture the essence of their wielder well, some felt less fitting than others. The weapons I feel fit their characters best would be Alex and his scalpel, Donnie and his mechanical pencil, Tree and her oven mitts, Edo and his boxing gloves, and Betty with her cane. Ones I don't think work as well are Julie's red nails, which apparently manifest due to her fondness for the red nails she had when preparing for an acting role, Anita's halberd, which barely resembles the mascara brush it's apparently based on, and Blake's marlin spike that his mentor in the Navy gave to him. While I do think a mascara brush suits Anita's character, even if it doesn't look like one, I think Julie could have had a more suitable weapon. She mentions her acting career a couple of times, but we never see her perform, and even then, surely there are different acting related items that could work as weapons. Maybe a script she could use to slice with its edge or smash with its face maybe. A shield type weapon would certainly fit her protective personality. Blake then is such an afterthought in the game that I don't think they cared what weapon he was given. In general, I think the blood weapons feel good to wield, all except for Edo and Trees. These two are basically unarmed since the reinforced blood carapace, I guess, coats only their hands. I actually don't dislike this in a vacuum. I have more a problem with their attack moveset. They both have a basic attack combo that sends out a few regular punches before performing a Hadouken-like ki blast which sends the enemy back a few feet. This for me broke the flow of combat constantly, as I would then have to approach the enemy again and continue my assault. It feels counterproductive to push an enemy away that you can only attack from close range. The ki blast also feels slower and less damaging than if I were to just continue my regular punches, but I haven't properly calculated this by analysing the battle data, so who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Blake is actually a more preferable character for me to use, as he dual wields his spikes like Edo and Tree wield both hands, yet he not only has extended reach but doesn't break the flow of combat with ki blasts. The abilities of each rarity are also reflective of their personalities and the lives they lead, although not nearly as clearly as the blood weapons. The blood weapons are easier to identify as they function as a part of the character's everyday life or career, while a deeper understanding of the character is needed for the abilities. Some characters may have one or two abilities that suit them, and then the rest feel added on to balance out their moveset. Julie's abilities make her an all-rounder. She can deal damage, heal herself and others, and inflict status effects on enemies. She's a good-natured person, so only one of her abilities is actually offensive. Alex, her opposite, is entirely aggressive in his moveset. Bloodwell and Blood Blast combo well to take out enemies once they're drawn into a group, and Time Bomb shows his darker side by cruelly sacrificing its user to deal a large amount of damage to a lot of enemies. Isn't this guy supposed to be a doctor? I also quite like how his moveset conveys his journey throughout the game. His goal to restrict all the Slitterheads to one small pocket of time and keep killing them over and over. Anita was my favourite rarity to use in combat, not only because her weapon allowed for stylish and acrobatic attacks, but her abilities were also fun to combo with each other like Alex's. By attracting more civilians into the arena and then mind controlling them to attack the enemy, you not only replenish your supply of bodies to hop to in a pinch, but also get to take the aggro off yourself for a moment while the pawns get in some damage for you. I found this vital to surviving some encounters, as it provided a window where I could run around and heal from scattered blood pools. I didn't use her poison needle ability that often, but I'd imagine it's useful when used early in longer battles. Unfortunately, Donnie is the last character I enjoyed using in combat. His weapon feels a lot like Anita's, which I found comfortable at this point, and his abilities are fairly useful. I found great utility in his fatal lance when fighting the floating Slitterheads near the end of the game, as they were otherwise very difficult to attack. You can also snipe them from the other side of the arena, which often allows you to stay out of range of their projectiles. His curse resist was also good for restoring the status quo in battle, but I never got much use out of the revenge guard. In the later missions of the game, you usually take far too much damage from a few attacks to risk this ability, and with how long and difficult some of the encounters are, I often just wanted to play it safe. I tend to group Tree and Edo together because they have similar fighting styles, but their abilities are quite different from one another. Tree is a homemaker and her warmth spreads to her abilities. Her sentry thorns distract enemies, allowing you to possibly heal allies. Her crimson chains are also supportive in that she can hold a mobile foe down while the other rarity, probably one with a higher damage output, gets some easy attacks in. Her bloody knuckles then buff her regular attacks because no matter how kind and caring a mother can be, they will occasionally have to dish out some discipline. Edo's abilities then all revolve around his boxing past. blocking every attack that's launched at him, sidestepping to access his opponent's unguarded areas, and a last-ditch effort to finish off his opponent at the risk of being taken out himself. All very appropriate and fitting to the character, but since I hate the punching attacks, I rarely used them. Betty and Blake were used by far the least in my playthrough, mostly because I didn't find either of them very compelling. I did go back and test out their combat styles in the practice mode so I could give them a fair assessment though. Blake's abilities reflect his military background. Bloody Shot works well at doing constant ranged chip damage, which contrasts Donnie's charged ranged attack that does high damage. It's a good option for safely finishing off an enemy from a safe distance, but I still prefer Donnie's Javelin because of how cool it is. His Bloody Mine ability turns blood pools into explosive traps that detonate when stepped on by an enemy. You'll get the most out of these when there are many pools, and it's probably not worth it with too few, as you then need to kite the enemies into them. They are at least a nice way to do indirect damage, but that's if you're willing to sacrifice some healing opportunities to do so. They're probably better utilised in high number enemy fights, as you can just leave them to do damage without needing to pay attention, but I don't think there's enough opportunities to do that, as there are more direct methods of engaging the enemy. Bloody Gamble I pretty much avoid completely, as my luck seems way too bad to get any benefit from it. So many times I didn't even get a shot off because the gun exploded instantly, sacrificing a chunk of my health in the process. Betty is apparently one of the best characters when fully upgraded, which is hilarious because I only used her once, maybe twice in the playthrough, and prioritise other characters' upgrades over hers. She has a similar ability to Blake's Bloody Mine in Diabolic, which casts an attack within a circled area but does instant damage by summoning spikes from blood pools. It can miss like Blake's, especially when only a couple of spikes are summoned, and it also doesn't stick around like the mines, so if you miss, you miss. It's a nice attack that can deal with a large group of enemies if you plan well. Indomitable is a buff that may counter an enemy's attack if you attack at the same time, but I didn't find it too interesting. Lunatic is weird. It puts Betty on autopilot and will attack whatever is closest with a buffed offense. I'm not too fond of this either, as I like to have as much control over my characters as possible, especially when entering a buffed rage mode. Slitterhead's characters are very hit or miss for me. I'd say there are 3 groups they could be placed into. The first group consists of Night Owl, Julie, Alex, and Anita. We learned the most about these characters through cutscenes, interactions, and intermission chats, and they all play a big part in the game's story. Anita is definitely the outlier in this group, but since we spent so much time with her and many of the beginning missions revolve around her story, so I consider her to be one of the main characters. The second group includes Tree, Edo, and maybe Donnie. These characters don't have as much involvement with the plot, but are still necessary for a couple of small developments here and there. The last group then consists of Betty and Blake, who might as well not be included in the game to be honest. Betty is acquired after encountering her 6 times in different missions, and feels more like she was included to serve that purpose rather than to be an actual character. She and Blake have their own histories with Night Owl that dates back much farther than the other characters, which proves that he has the ability to go further back in time than he thought. This information doesn't seem like it warrants the inclusion of another character though. Blake then is so forgettable that I kept accidentally excluding him when talking about the group as a whole. He doesn't even get an introductory rescue mission like most of the others. He just joins out of nowhere, and I have to wonder why he was even added at all. I'm starting to think he and Betty being British is a subtle jab at them not fitting in with the rest of the team, which would certainly tie into the history between the 2 nations. But anyway, my point is that many of Slitterhead's characters feel underutilized, and I think you could cut the cast down to just Alex, Julie, Anita, and maybe 1 extra, and nothing of major importance would be lost. By trimming the fat, the remaining characters could be allocated new abilities that help diverse the group, and there wouldn't be as much overlap with weapon styles and abilities. Regarding Tree and Edo, they do play a small part in the story in that they help us progress further into the cult's headquarters, but did we really need 2 characters to accomplish that? I feel like with some improved espionage sections we could discover that information ourselves. There's a definite conflict in how mandatory some of the secondary rarities are for progression, yet they're basically pushed to the side as soon as they've fulfilled their purpose. Another issue I feel wouldn't exist with a smaller cast. The intermission chats with rarities are weird. I like how we get a chance to discuss recent events with characters and see how they feel about developments, but the presentation is something I never got used to. I understand that Night Owl isn't a physical being, so we can't just sit the two characters down at a table for a discussion, but there has to be a less awkward way of conveying the psychic communication. The view of an environment in the background often doesn't match up with the actions or positioning of the character within it, and the fading in and out views of their faces rarely matches with their actions behind. Also, I hate the mumbling and sighing that's used in place of characters speaking. I understand that it's a budget limitation, as they most likely couldn't afford to have the voice actors perform all the lines and opted for some tonally appropriate sounds that could be applied to whatever situation they fit, but the presentation is still really weird. It also doesn't help that the soundtrack that accompanies these chats is some of the most unhinged music I've ever heard, sounding more like a deranged person's rendition of a Korn song than actual menu music. It's rare, but the characters can interact with each other during these chats, which is really the only occasion they do so apart from interacting with one during a mission. This is another seriously missed opportunity because despite us basically assembling a team, we never see them engage with one another. The only instance I recall during my playthrough is a conversation between Donnie and Anita, which is made super weird because Anita was lounging around in her underwear. It's weird. It's disappointing to not see the rarities interact more, possibly strengthening relationships or having arguments over the events in the game. They're all different people from very different backgrounds, which creates the perfect opportunity to expose the dynamics within the group. As it is, they all feel like rental cars that we pick up for missions instead of actual characters. To go back to the mumbling, it's clearly a budgetary issue, which I totally understand, but there are occasions where it really doesn't work in the game. During the intermission chats, it works because of the cerebral nature of the conversations. During the in-game cutscenes, however, it creates a jarring effect that really shows the cuts the team had to make to get the game finished. If the game didn't have pre-rendered cutscenes with full voice acting, I think it wouldn't be such a questionable choice, but seeing characters grunt and sigh instead of actually emitting the sounds their mouths are moving to create really ruins a lot of the scenes it happens in. The villains in the vision at the beginning of the game felt like super powerful Slitterhead gods that would lay waste to the entire city if we didn't somehow find a way to stop them. I was a bit disappointed to discover that these were little more than regular Slitterheads. I mean, I understand Lisa was especially powerful, but considering her boss fights weren't that different from Yin Yue and Michelle's, I was a bit underwhelmed. I also now question if they could even cause the widespread ruin the vision depicted, since I think a large amount of that would have been caused by the plane crash, right? Maybe not. It's pretty ambiguous what exactly caused the widespread ruin in the vision. The three main Slitterheads are interesting to look at as each of them challenges one of the three main characters. Michelle intended to bring Anita into her family, that being the Slitterheads, but couldn't due to Night Owl beating her to it. Since Anita was raised by Michelle, they were already effectively family, but once Michelle turned into a Slitterhead, her family changed, pushing Anita out. Michelle probably cared deeply for Anita, but once turned became more sadistic, treating everyone as inferior beings and using them. Maybe her personality exhibited aspects of that already, but it's hard to say as we don't know her before the events of the game. Her raising of Anita instead of letting her starve in the streets could indicate that she was actually caring, or it could just be her way of grooming Anita into a profitable employee. It's hard to say, but in the end it does unfortunately reinforce Anita's deeply ingrained belief that she's alone and can only count on herself in this world, despite possibly opening herself up to a relationship with Michelle. Yin Yue presented as a well-intentioned man with an optimistic outlook for the world. He desired coexistence with Slitterheads and humans, something which Julie came to desire as well. When the veil of truth is lowered and he realizes the organization he dedicated himself to was a complete fraud, the perception of reality he created shatters. The kind-hearted leader's mask breaks away to reveal the monster beneath. This conveys that good vibes and happy feelings aren't enough to upend the current form of society, at least right now. Julie's hopeful attitude that everyone could get along is shown to be naive, as the monster of reality is always waiting to break free. Lisa then torments Alex by trapping him in a cycle of self-destruction, despite him believing he's the one trapping Lisa in a cycle of destruction. Whether this is intended to divert his attention from achieving anything actually productive in the fight against the Slitterheads, or if she really does just get a kick out of watching him suffer, is unclear, but either works for me. Since the beginning of the game, he was hell-bent on avenging his loved ones, but loses both himself and his true reason for fighting in his repeated massacres. Despite Lisa being sealed away, he feels he can only rest when all of his burdens are dealt with, which includes the rarities, Night Owl, and the rest of the Slitterheads. Alex is the one character who I feel doesn't have a complete arc, which makes me think that there will be a DLC or sequel. I don't consider it a flaw for him to not come to some realization that his ways are wrong or something, because there is clearly more story to tell. Alex's goal extends beyond the scope of this small story. The Slitterheads still exist, and so does his determination for their eradication. The only slight resolution being that he's now forced to progress through time to destroy them instead of trapping them and the world in a 3-day cycle. Slitterhead's story gets increasingly complex. The time travel aspect was a surprising and fun addition, but then it goes a step further and introduces multiple timelines which you can switch between on a whim. In general, I find Slitterhead's story to be fairly messy, which comes with the territory of being a time travel plot, I guess. The fact that we go back in time many times throughout the game in order to change events makes it very hard to follow, which makes assessing how well the game explored its characters and themes all the more difficult. For the most part, if we just focus on the two main characters, Julie and Alex, I think the game did a good job of showing their journey. They act as foils to each other, and we see multiple instances of that throughout. The decision to have the final battle between these two characters is one I approve of because it's a concentrated, more personal story of two people within the greater context of the Slitterheads versus humans. I think this works because if the developers wanted to explore the story from a grander scale, they would have shown the cataclysm that forced the humans in the future to travel back in time and increased the scope of their invasion to more than just one dense city in Hong Kong. Maybe we'll see more of that in a possible sequel, but I always think small-scale stories are best for a first outing. It also helps to establish an emotional connection between the character and this world through its characters before moving to a scale where these characters are less impactful. Done wrong, it could feel more like a nature documentary where the player watches impartially as an ant nest is invaded by termites. What I want is to see and feel the experiences of these ants as they fight against this would-be destructor. Regarding Night Owl, what I find most interesting is the development of his personality through possessing people. At the beginning of the game, Night Owl is a blank slate, uncaring to the well-being and desires of the tools it operates with a singular desire to destroy Slitterheads. As he possesses each of the rarities, he gains knowledge of their experiences and the emotional feelings and logical thoughts that are born from their journey through life so far. We see this change him, gradually opening him up to more possibilities regarding his immortal enemy. Maybe they're not all heartless monsters. Maybe they don't all need to be eradicated. They were originally human, and while their evolution through the ages has changed them significantly, there are hints that they still retain an element of that humanity. It's not all easy progress though, as his connection to Alex pulls him back to his ruthless ways, only for him to fight against it because of how much his perspective has changed. This internal moral struggle is the most human part of Night Owl. I do find it a bit disappointing that his personality isn't influenced as much by the rarities outside of Julie and Alex. Like, it might have been nice to see stronger examples of him adopting Donnie's analytical approach or Anita's pragmatism. Digging into the scattered memories of Night Owl, we learn the history of how and why he and the Slitterheads came here. There are 36 memories, each of which expand the story by a fraction, and in it we see many of the themes present within the rest of the game. A society subjected and used as a source of food. A group of survivors banding together to stop the destruction from happening in the first place, and a closed loop of causality, of events destined to happen and repeat themselves. It hints at a larger story that we don't really see, including a man named DD who goes missing during the initial activation of the time travel machine, which feels like something that could be explored in a future DLC or sequel. I like this method of exposition. It makes sense both in how Night Owl might have detached these memories in order to not overwhelm his hosts when first possessing them, like Cate Blanchett in that terrible Indiana Jones film. He may also have just lost them accidentally upon coming back, although I believe this may not be his first attempt at rewriting history. This theory that he has already repeated these starting events before may indicate that the premonition Julie has of a city burning may actually be remnants of a memory of a previously visited timeline or universe. Christ, this game leaves you with an awful lot of questions. The most interesting thing about this game is of course the Slitterheads. Setting aside their time travel abilities, their infiltration of the human race is fascinating to witness, especially considering how successful a lot of them are. While playing, I noticed many similarities between the Slitterheads of Slitterhead and the Parasites of Parasite, beyond just the obvious morphing heads. I decided to rewatch Parasite while playing through the game and found many commonalities between the two and almost as many examples of how the creatures approached their invasion differently. By observing these differences, I came to understand the Slitterheads and Parasites more, so I'd like to talk briefly about that. Parasite, like Slitterhead, tells the tale of beings that come from another world. The parasites fall from outer space and are driven by the sole instinct to devour humanity, most likely because they sense we are the planet's dominant species. In their larval form, they aim to overtake the human brain and gain control of the body. In doing this, they acquire the ability to morph the head to suit their needs, be it a weapon, a change in appearance, or whatever else they find the need for. The story's protagonist, Shinichi, prevents a parasite from taking his brain and instead traps it in his arm, which it then assimilates out of a biological clock-induced sense of desperation. Since the parasite's survival is now tied to that of its host, they decide to work together, developing a codependent relationship. The parasite, Migi, lives in Shinichi's arm, who in turn is protected by Migi from other parasites that successfully took a human's brain. Migi survives off Shinichi's bloodstream, while the successful parasites feed on other humans. If you're also noticing a lot of similarities between the two properties, then don't be alarmed. Parasite was confirmed to be one of the inspirations for Slitterhead, so I feel more than validated in my recognition of the connection. The dynamic between the very emotional Shinichi and the emotionless Migi is often frictional at the start because Migi just fundamentally doesn't understand human culture. As time progresses and Migi becomes more familiar with humanity through research and first-hand experience, the conflict between their personalities is eroded. Not completely, but enough for them to at least coexist with minimal difficulty. We see elements of this in Slitterhead too, with Night Owl's personality developing as he gains access to different human experiences. Toyama stated in an interview with Epic,
"People are born. You're the same human being, but if you're born in a different country or a different place, live a different life, it's a completely different perspective, a different person. I thought it'd be interesting if the protagonist was a spirit who has no memory but can travel through bodies and interact with the human host. The spirit would be swayed by how they looked at the world, their lives, and their opinions."
Night Owl's personality often changes from moment to moment due to the wildly different influences on his psyche. We also get to see how other characters react to him when channeling the personality of another who has a different perspective. The personalities of the respective hosts are also affected by Night Owl's presence, gaining a perspective that only that of an inhuman being could provide, allowing them to often step outside of themselves to see the bigger picture. There are some inconsistencies here though, including how Night Owl and the rarities don't feel as much remorse, if any, as you'd expect them to feel as civilians are sacrificed around them during combat. I think this is just an oversight though, as with so many philosophical intricacies, some things are bound to slip through the cracks. The main difference between the parasites and the Slitterheads is that the parasites don't acquire the memories of their host upon possession. Because of this, for a short time after arriving, they lack many of the expressions and mannerisms that would help them disguise themselves within society. Like with Migi, they grow more knowledgeable of the species they're hiding amongst and are able to fit in better, which is actually more important for them as survival is more dependent on the success of their infiltration than it is for Migi. Later in the story, one parasite begins to show signs of humanity. This is only achieved after stepping outside of their natural instincts though. She tried harder than others to establish a life within human society. She got a job, stopped consuming human flesh, became pregnant and began raising a human child, all of which contributed to a spark of human emotion not seen in any parasite so far. Proof that these interplanetary beings can exist within humanity if they try. We also see this in Slitterhead, with many of them attempting to avoid hurting humans, either by consuming the flesh of already dead people or rations they believed to be a harmless alternative. There's a clear attempt at coexistence by some of the Slitterheads, and it's not just a case of both species living separately in case of friction, but Slitterheads and humans sharing living spaces and activities with one another. It's possible the parasites came to Earth in search of resources that they'd exhausted on their world, a desperate attempt to escape certain death, much like the humans travelling back in time to escape the extinction in their future. They aren't an overly powerful invading force that can lay waste to the planet's current inhabitants to acquire what they need, so they must instead find ways of integrating into human society in a sustainable way. Alongside the cult's inclusion of both Slitterheads and humans, I think the best example of coexistence in the game is the family whose daughter became a Slitterhead. The girl, despite having been overtaken by a monster, is still their daughter, so the parents do their best to treat her as such. It would be a different case if the Slitterhead didn't retain the host's memories, effectively erasing the daughter's existence. But it does, and so they continue to function as a family, just with the new need to manage the girl's condition, like an incurable but manageable disease. One point raised by both antagonists is humanity's hypocrisy for condemning the invaders for their consumption of humans, while also not only using lower intelligence animals for food, but also farming them specifically for that purpose. When we see the tanks of fleshy substance in the cult's laboratory, we're disgusted. How could they do such a barbaric thing? Meanwhile, countless chicken farms across the world are blending live male chicks into mush because they can't be harvested for their eggs and aren't worth the money to keep alive. And that's just one very specific example. It's a point that's hard to argue against, and we only can because we're the dominant species on Earth. What then if we are dethroned? Do we deserve to judge the creatures for their need to survive just as we do? I don't think so. I find it interesting that the Slitterheads are humanity's future. We see in their power and destruction the consequences of a species unchecked by a natural adversary. Humanity has not only conquered the food chain but removed itself from it. Slitterheads are balance, a corrective measure ironically born from a failed corrective measure. Similarly, the parasites exist to challenge humanity's ego. If anything, the planet may be left in better hands with the parasites, as stated by Miggy.
Although humans kill and eat a wide variety of life forms, my kind eat merely 1 or 2 kinds at most. We are quite frugal in comparison.
I can imagine a world where instead of dozens of animal species kept as livestock, there's only one: humanity. So what is Slitterhead actually about, and is it a good horror game? It attempts to mash a lot of interesting and cool elements together, sometimes creating an experience that feels unique and fun, but occasionally creating friction between incompatible gameplay elements. It's relatively light on horror, at least compared to what I usually cover on this channel, and leans more towards action, which it does do fairly well. I will say I'm disappointed by the lack of effective horror elements and atmosphere, especially considering that initial reveal trailer, but I did enjoy the gameplay experience overall. Slitterhead has a lot to say, but I found it to be an unmasking of humanity's hypocrisy through comparison of our relationships with the animals we share the planet with, an examination of whether or not, and if so how, 2 or more species can coexist, an exploration of how a personality can be influenced by those around it, as well as a lesson on the value of life. Does it execute all of these philosophical questions perfectly? Probably not, but I've spent longer thinking about this game than any other I've ever played, so I feel it's an experience I'm not likely to soon cast aside. A quick thanks to AesirAesthetics and Nightmoire who lent their voices to this video. I encourage everyone to check out their channels if you're not already familiar with them. Links to both can be found in the video's description. Aesir has been one of my favourite creators for years, and Nightmoire is quickly becoming one too, so I am extremely grateful to them for working with me on this video. Also, if you enjoyed this video and would like to help me make more, I have a Patreon where I not only post monthly updates, early access and behind the scenes looks at in-progress videos, but also exclusive reviews on Asian horror films. Thanks to funds made from YouTube and Patreon, I was recently able to repair the laptop I used to capture footage, so a huge thank you to everyone who supports me in any way. Thanks for watching.